Blog Talk Radio.
Folks, welcome. I'm Dan McDermott. This is the McDermott Report. We are live broadcasting from Lynchburg, Virginia. And we're every weeknight at 8 p.m. Eastern, and we're, what's that? That's 5 p.m. Western Pacific. Anyway, I don't know. Emily's with me. Emily, welcome. Good to have you aboard.
Thanks.
All right, we have a full slate of topics. Emily's been busy today. And among them, I'm hoping to get a guy. I'm hoping a guy's going to call. I upset him. I think I was talking about the unions yesterday, and I'm hoping he'll call. I want to hash it out with him. I want to have a nice chat about my views. And he has some good points. Good guy, good hardworking guy. He's a retired auto worker, and we disagreed on mandatory union membership. And I'd like to have it out with him. I mean, in a polite way. I want to hear what he has to say, because he has some strong points, and I'm hoping he'll call. And I invited him to call a couple times today. So, Emily, it is Thursday. We got one more day of this fun stuff. You're here tomorrow, right? You're not here tomorrow.
No.
Ah, okay. I'll have to get
Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
That's right. Okay, so there was a bunch of stuff. I guess the biggest story going on, right, a lot of folks are talking about, and this hits folks from all walks of life, the Anthony verdict. And I remember from OJ, I was critical of the verdict, as many people were. And there was largely a racial divide on the O.J. Simpson verdict. I remember I worked as a computer programmer, and my boss, really good guy, was African American, and the whole time we would, he'd make sarcastic remarks, and I wouldn't. We'd each roll our eyes, but whether O.J. did it or not. And it was really interesting, but it boils down to this. As much as I think, in my opinion, he got away with murder in the criminal case, as many folks think. But it really is hard to criticize a verdict if you weren't there the whole time, or at least watching it the whole time. And even then, it's not the same. I've been on a jury twice. Emily, have you ever had jury duty?
I did, and I was really excited to have it. And then at the last minute, they told me they didn't need me.
Well,
yeah.
That's not the case with McDermott Report, where you're always welcome to come in.
Always needed.
Yeah. But it is hard. It's unless you're there, it's difficult to judge a verdict, and that's the case here. But a lot of folks watched it, and the juror number 3 said, they couldn't even establish how the baby died, and I don't know if it was a botched prosecution or just the evidence wasn't there. I mean, you could have had, sometimes innocent people are found guilty. Sometimes guilty people are found innocent. Who's to say? She's been acquitted. She's going to be out, I think, July 13th, because she's already served, some house arrest for a couple years. And that counts. And, of course, California, or I guess the good time thing or whatever. But what are you, from 10,000 feet in the air, I don't know how much you watch this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I really didn't follow it much at all. But I know that there's this idea that's been thrown around for a while now called the CSI bias. And the idea is that juries are expecting more and more hard evidence based on what they watch on TV. So looking for DNA or, where's the murder weapon, which I guess has always been there. But all of these fancy techniques that you see Hollywood producing, the jurors are looking for, everyday crime labs to produce that as well. And it's just, there's a disconnect between fiction and reality that's happening. I'm not sure if that actually happened in this case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with the verdict.
Okay. Well, I don't know. People have an opinion, and I know that there were folks outraged and saying, I think one person had a sign like "hang the jury" or something. And again, I don't know. It's a child has died, and there's speculation about whether she drowned in a pool, and then just the woman's behavior. But then apparently she exhibited this behavior before and after. It wasn't like a sudden bout of 22-year-old itis or something.
It's true. But I think that there's there's a problem with the amount of media hype that goes on with cases like this, where people feel like they know everything that's going on and they feel very connected to the case, even though they, of course, are sitting in front of their televisions miles and hundreds of miles away from where it's happening. It's unfortunate that people don't put trust into the judicial system. I think it's probably an American thing to do, to feel like we are doing the right thing in the judicial system. And, I was talking to Dan earlier, actually, about how I'm confused about why people get so nervous when we try terrorists in our country, why there's such an uproar about it. And I really think that, I personally, trust our police and armed forces enough to keep the prisoners under control, and then trust our judicial system enough to make the right decision. But speaking of judicial system and making the right decision, we have our death row case going on.
Yes, and I want to get back to the other issue, but the death row case, I guess, I don't even know what the current status is. I think right before we started, we were waiting to hear, but this is a case where it's a Mexican national, but I think he's been here most of his life, but since he was 2, does this sound right? And there's a treaty where if you arrest a foreign national or a Mexican, you have to alert the Mexican authorities. And I'm a former U.S. diplomat, or my dad was, right? So we had diplomatic immunity. We were, working at the U.S. Embassy in a number of countries. And I know that if someone ever we were in one country where it was just blatantly corrupt, and some people would be pulled over for attempted speeding, but luckily the officer caught them before they had a chance, and you would give them $20 or $5 or whatever and be on your way. But if you ever got in trouble, the first thing they'd say is, you tell them, call the embassy or take me to the embassy. And in some countries where we don't have diplomatic relations, there's still it's an embassy all but in name. There'll be a consulate or some sort of mission, the U.S. interest office or something. But that didn't happen in this case, and they delayed the case for a year to allow the Congress to act on it and to say, that the guy should not be sentenced to the death penalty or should be returned to Mexico, what have you. And the folks in Texas are like, hey, this is the law. He did it. They had a year to do it. He's had incredibly talented legal representation that he could never have afforded, but a death row case, they throw it on. And I think Texas has the most capital punishment of any state, and I think Virginia's up there. But anyway, so I guess there is a technicality that exists, and former President Bush and President Obama have both asked for a stay for this. But a lot of this just goes down. First of all, your personal views on capital punishment matter, and I heard a journalist today who was in that area and talking to folks in that area, and she said, it basically falls down to what are your views on capital punishment, and if you're strongly against it or for it, then that's where you stand on this case. It's, I don't know. It's a technicality, but what politician is going to go out on a limb to defend a guy accused of murder and convicted and on death row, especially a Texas politician? Because I think there's still a majority support, although it's changing somewhat, because there is some evidence that it's not fairly applied. But that's a subject for another debate. We'd have to get someone on who's a couple people who are experts on that. But
it's unfortunate that people are seeing this, that it's divided along the lines of whether you favor capital punishment or not. Especially since when you think about the idea of having the right to contact your consulate, if I was anywhere else in the world and wasn't extended that right as a result of this, imagine it's the kind of thing that, do unto others as you have them do unto yourself. And, you know, even if he definitely murdered someone and everything, what have you, the simple technical fact that we didn't let him contact his embassy it's not a good diplomatic move. And I would argue that President George W. Bush probably favors capital punishment. And, I mean, that would be a wise voice for them to have listened to in Texas. Unfortunately, here we are. And the execution was scheduled for 7 Eastern Standard Time is what we read. But we haven't heard, you know, up or down, I guess, on that yet.
Yeah, I think this. I think the two presidents are thinking in terms of an international issue, our relationships with Mexico. They're thinking in terms of is the fate of this person as important as our relationship nation to nation. And I can see someone, a former president, who can never be elected president again. He's peaked, right? And the current president saying that, especially saying it knowing that it's not going to happen.
It's true. And the people the politicians hurt by putting this man to death and not going through the proper diplomatic channels are expats for the most part, people not living in the United States. And, you know, they're not a big voting demographic, unfortunately. So the people that are really going to be affected by this or have the potential to be affected by this aren't being listened to or thought of.
Yeah, I think that they're thinking about the victim's relatives, and obviously, I don't know what their view is. But I don't know. I don't want to. It's like it's one of these calls. If I were the Secretary of State, then my job is to look out for the United States foreign policy in the country, and I would have a different perspective on it. And I don't know enough about this case, but I know he's gone through the appeals court, the state Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, he's years and years.
But I mean, the question is, would you, if you had a family member who died, would you risk the lives of other innocent people in order to kill the murderer?
Well, I don't know if that's the case here. This isn't burning a Koran by that kook, then someone gets, a bunch of people get murdered in Afghanistan.
It isn't, but it's the kind of thing that, I mean, if I was a country that was on the fence of the U.S., I might point to this and say, you guys didn't do that, so why should we send your person to the embassy?
Yeah, I don't know if there are too many people who are advocates for this person as much as advocates, opponents of the death penalty.
Yeah.
Or advocates in the case of the former president and current president, advocates for the state of relations between Mexico and their former
and I guess I'm speaking
in
very academically in an abstract manner about
which
the
is
issue.
easy to do when it's not your loved one who was but I mean that's there you go. All right,
dark topics.
Now let's talk about happy stuff. All right, so tell me there's been some developments in the news of the world thing, and I was joking with you today. I told you I was going to do this. I'm going to give you an opportunity now to apologize for all the mean things you said about Rupert, and but no, I'm serious. But seriously, what do you what do you think about the news of the world is going to shut down now?
Well, specifically, Murdoch is shutting down the news of the world. Is what came across. And I mean, you can argue that he's a good man for doing the right thing all you want, but there's definitely the other side of the argument, which is that he's doing it to save his own tail. That if he acts now, then, it's obvious that something came forward that made him really worried about whatever inquiries we're going to go for from here. So I don't know. The people of the UK are really ticked off about the whole matter too, which, I mean, they have a right to be.
They are, and they have a right to be. And I guess if you're not familiar with it, there's been this ongoing hacking scandal. News of the World, it's important. We say they're shutting down. This Sunday, they're going to Rupert Murdoch, who's chairman of News Corporation, which owns a number of properties in the United States. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Dow Jones, publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, the Fox movie studios, 20th Century Fox, or whatever. I'm not sure what it's called. The
New
Fox
York
broadcast, that's all, and it's $60-80 billion worth of stuff, and no one is suggesting that Rupert Murdoch personally hacked into anything, but News of the World is the #1 Sunday paper in the United Kingdom. It's a Sunday tabloid. It's known for sort of gotcha stories and gossipy type tabloidy stuff about celebrities and politicians. And there was this ongoing scandal. A bunch of politicians, members of the royal family, had their phones hacked. Now, I guess what that means is somehow they gained access to the voicemail. I don't know how they did it. If it was just they were using, I don't know how that's happened.
I think they just had to figure out the PIN number.
So there wasn't like if you try it X number of times, it locks you out. It was just you could just sit there all day until you find,
Or they have informants, or who knows? Who knows how they did it? And it's possible that they did it digitally at this point. I mean, if they have smartphones, which I'm sure all of them do.
So it's one thing to get Tony Blair's or a cousin in the royal family. That's one thing. That's bad, right? Mm-hmm. But then there was this case. It was a kidnapping victim, and they were getting on the phone, and they were listening to the voicemails to write a story, ostensibly, and they were deleting the voicemails so that the voicemail box wouldn't fill up, so they could keep getting more. And the effect of this was that the family thought for a period that the victim was alive because the victim's phone voicemails were being deleted. Mm-hmm. And then it turns out that's not the case, that it was News of the World folks, and apparently the former Andy Coulson, is he the, I'm embarrassed now, I don't know, he's the he was David Cameron's director of communications. He resigned, Prime Minister David Cameron of England, and he's expected to be arrested tomorrow. And then another, I'm looking here at The Guardian, another former senior journalist at News of the World. And so Rupert Murdoch, again, this is the #1 Sunday paper in the United Kingdom, but some advertisers had withdrawn. I think Ford was one of them. That folks in the U.S. will recognize, obviously. Well, this is a world brand, but so he's going to close it, and it's an old paper. It's been around, I don't know,
170 years,
160 something, yeah. So this is, and he's going to close it, and he said that he's going to donate the money from the last issue, which should be significant. I would guess there's going to be some sort of mea culpa in the paper, and they're going to donate all that money to a worthy cause. Mm-hmm. Which, would you care to speculate what Rupert, maybe the Columbia School of Journalism?
That'd be nice, since it's obvious that his journalists didn't take an ethics course before they got their jobs.
He wouldn't do that because they hosted the Ahmadinejad speech.
Heaven forbid.
I want to ask you what you thought of that. But do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, it's not over yet, but what are your thoughts thus far?
I mean, it's obvious. Well, some of my thoughts on Murdoch closing it is that him closing it now shows to me that either he didn't have a clue what was going on before and he just found out about it, or that someone's hot on the trail, which is obvious since people are going to be arrested soon, or a combination of both. I mean, he might have been very hands-off with the paper and had no idea, but I'd be surprised if it gets linked back to him in any way. But yeah, at this point, I think closing the paper is probably the only clean way out for them. It's despicable that they would do something like that. It's beyond. I mean, as journalists, you go through so many ethical questions that are so minor compared to what they did. And to move beyond that to the stage where you're, affecting... I mean, the voicemails they were deleting off of this kidnapping victim were, someone was sitting there and listening to the parents of this child, where are you, crying. And, you can just imagine what the voicemails must have been. And
I'm sure that there were voicemails from the family back. Where are you? Tell us. And just this, and they're just jotting it all down.
How inhuman do you have to be to do that and think it's okay? I mean, as journalists, we represent the people. That's what we're here to do. And they were not representing the people. They were representing, the bank, I guess, making money for their paper. Period.
All right, let me ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you a question. You're an honest person, but I'm going to ask you a question that I wouldn't be surprised if you gave me a dishonest answer to.
Okay.
Let me give you a hypothetical, because we're journalists. I publish 3 newspapers. I'm a former news director at a radio station, a former radio talk show host. I do this now. And if you're I'm said Pulitzer Prize. You have a master's degree in journalism, and you're a terrific writer, and you're hungry. You want the story. You get excited. We've had stories here at the Lynchburg Times, and you're, man, I can't wait to dig my teeth into this. If you, before all this came out, if you had a politician's aide, let's say there was a big scandal. Let's say Anthony Weiner. Okay? If someone's a good friend of yours, you knew you could trust this person, was an intern and left 2 months ago. He said, you know what? I got Anthony Weiner's voicemail thing. He saw him type it in right. So the guy Anthony Weiner doesn't know the guy knows it. He's never used it, but he said, you know what? I'll bet you if you call this number at 5 in the morning when he won't answer, and you punch in his code, you'll be able to hear his voicemails right in the middle of the Anthony Weiner scandal, right? And you're thinking, well, you know what? I could go buy a Magic Jack for $40, and I could go to some internet cafe and plug it in. Nobody will ever know. The guy's protected because Anthony Weiner didn't know, and this is purely hypothetical. I'm just coming up with this. He didn't know, so there's no way this guy can get in trouble. No, he won't even know if you did it because you told the guy, I would never pursue that. Then you're going to go to an internet cafe with your $40 Magic Jack or use a prepaid cellular, whatever, and you could have the story of your career. You could have had him admitting that he did it, before it broke. Now that's a wild scenario, right? But that's a tough call, isn't it?
Well, I'm actually going to give you an in-between answer, which might be kind of tricky and a little shaky ethically. But if someone came to me with information like that, before they even told me what the number was, I would say something to the effect of, if you think this is important and you want to call that and give me the information as an anonymous source, then I might consider it. But, that's the kind of thing that you just can't do. It's the same reason why, I'm an independent.
Don't tell me you wouldn't think
unregistered.
about it for a second or a minute.
I would not think about doing it myself because it would ruin my career if anyone found out about it. Period. It's the same reason why I won't go on record saying whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat. I'm neither. I'm unregistered and I will never vote in a primary because, I vote in every election, but I'm not registered with a party. There's certain career decisions that you have to make that are responsible ones, and typing that in, while it might give you a great story, is not a responsible career decision.
No, it's not a responsible decision. It's not a responsible career decision. It's very risky.
Yeah.
But boy, you could have had the story. You could have had the big, story of the century, right?
I would totally tell my buddy that, if they want to listen to those messages and then leak them to me, that's a totally different story. That's
checks in the mail.
Different.
I gave it the office. I don't know.
And that's an honest that's an honest answer.
It's a good ethics question, though, isn't it? It
Yeah.
makes you think.
I took a whole big semester of ethics.
And this is not a sympathetic victim, right? This is not the family mourning for their child and making, this horrible act. This is some guy who took a picture of his, aroused parts and sent it to somebody and lied about it. I mean, that's a victimless thing in itself. But and then it's just, and he was such an attack dog. That's why he went down, because he was the first one to trash everybody else, and there was no love lost between him and a lot of folks. They were just that's the reason you saw like Breitbart and those guys going for his jugular vein.
And I might have a completely different answer to that question if I had not gone through a master's program in journalism where ethics was just embedded. I mean, the professor who taught me ethics is actually a former editor from the LA Times during the OJ case. So he had all kinds of stories about like just sitting back and being like, are we covering this too much? And I mean, it was great and great insight. And I think that if I hadn't been told all these things and all these tricky decisions that other people had made over the years, that I might have a different answer to that question, that I might not know how bad it was what I was doing. But and this is all just everyone who owns a newspaper out there, hire people with master's degrees. We're great. We're awesome.
But not Emily. She's taken. Yeah, but it makes any reporter would at least think about it for a minute and then come to your senses. There's a fine line between legally digging for the story, because most of the time when you have a negative story, most of the time people don't want you. That's why you see TV crews, the camera person is usually a man about 6'6", 6'8", right? A football type guy. Because a lot of people don't want to be on the news. Because it's not all, this person was exonerated today. No, it's this guy, the perp walk. So, yeah, I don't know.
There's a reason reporters' notebooks are so small. It's not because they're easy to write in, because they're not. It's so you can hide it in your pocket and whip it out when you get to somebody.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a whole thing. But, yeah, I want to ask you real quick about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Personally, I think he's, a medieval animal. But what did you think when he gave a speech at Columbia and there was a bunch of drama, whether he should be allowed? What were your thoughts on that?
I think if there was anywhere where he should be allowed to give a speech, it would be at a journalism school. I think there's no problem with having any leader of any sort talk to a bunch of journalists. I mean, I don't think that because someone's a bad person and does bad things means that they shouldn't be interviewed and listened to.
Yeah, I think he wasn't. I mean, he was invited by a journalism school, and the interview was not kid glove. The guy was straight up, belligerent and rude to him. But this is a guy, since then he's stolen his last election, and it's just a corrupt regime. He's just, a bad guy with blood on his hands. But I think that says what our country's about. That, of course, the First Amendment would. I don't know if it would apply to a foreign leader, but it's not to protect popular speech. It's to protect unpopular speech. And if you start picking and choosing who's to decide. And although no one disputed Columbia's right to do it, they just said it was bad form and they shouldn't do it because the guy's, evil.
It's not like they were hoisting banners saying "Welcome to America" and stuff like that when he came.
He did not receive a warm embrace.
Yeah, it was an interview, and anyone can interview anyone. I'm sure that like Barbara Walters or someone interviewed the Unabomber or some other notorious serial killer from before my time. People have interviewed Manson, I think.
Geraldo. I like Geraldo. You like Geraldo?
Yeah, He's got a look to him. I think it's important for TV news to have like a
machismo. That undefined characteristic.
That's right.
Found only in mustached
any name
Hispanic men.
Their face pops into your head as soon as you hear it.
He's one of those one name people.
Yeah.
But anyway. All right. Okay, there's some tech stuff. This is interesting. This is from CNET. Top ISPs, internet service providers like Comcast, or in most cases, whoever your cable company is, or if, God forbid, you have dial-up, whoever your phone company is, top ISPs agree to become copyright cops. What do you think? Tell me what this is about.
You know, well, the idea behind it is that the ISP or the providers, I always want to say ISP providers, but that's very redundant. Their point of view and what they're saying in all of their releases is that they feel consumers have the right to know whether they're violating copyright infringement. I mean, there's this I have a great quote by, his name's James Asley. He's the VP of National Cable and Telecommunications Association, which I assume is like a work group for all these ISPs. But he says, consumers have a right to know if their broadband account is being used for illegal online content theft, or if their own online activity infringes on copyright rules, so that they can correct that activity. And I think that they can say noble things like that all they want, but the reason they're doing it is because the music industry and all these other people they work with are going to be really happy by what they're doing.
Well, here's what they're saying. Here's what they're saying.
It's totally a business move.
Leaders from the movie, television, music, and internet service provider communities today announced a landmark agreement on a common framework for copyright alerts. The parties said in a statement they will educate, and these alerts will educate and notify internet subscribers when their internet service accounts possibly are being misused for online content theft. This voluntary landmark collaboration will educate subscribers about content theft on their internet accounts, benefiting consumers and copyright owners alike. My first thing is, now they're going to be looking at what you're doing. What if you're married and have a girlfriend and you're looking at Playboy.com? Is that going to show up somewhere? Or the Sports Illustrated swimsuit website or whatever?
Well, I think that they already have access to everything you're doing, which people don't realize.
Well, they do, certainly, if they needed to look. But
so I think that it's not like one person's going to be thumbing through in the way that people at the airport look at your X-rays now. I think that the computers will just be set up to target torrent sites and other, downloading things. I would assume that probably international streaming sites where you can watch pirated TV shows and stuff like that will probably also be targeted. I mean, my thoughts on piracy have always been that it's a case of the big guy getting really angry at the little guy, and of course being able to do a lot about it.
Not always. I wrote a computer game in 1993 when you were born, maybe? Seven. Called Towers of Kubla Khan. MVP published it. And I think they licensed 110,000, a little over 110,000 copies, either selling them on discs or to other companies, mainly wholesale to other companies to put them on CDs, right, compact discs. And I got paid, but I didn't get rich from it. And I saw it on eBay recently. If you Google Dan McDermott Towers of Kubla Khan, you'll see it there, in places. And I looked at the disc, and I don't think it was, because they would tell me what they licensed, because I get copy. I got demos from Canada. One was cool. It was in Hungary, and I couldn't read anything on it, and I could just see the picture of it. I was like, okay, that's my game. I got paid. I don't care. Go Hungary, And it was exciting and all, but and it's not a big deal. It's almost flattering now that, 18 years later, 17 years later, it's an old DOS game. The audio doesn't even work in Windows. because it was before Windows, but it was. It's not all rich people, you know. It's sometimes little guys who.
So do you think you lost money from that, though, or do you think that these are people who are, you know, making copies of your out-of-print game?
B. But, I mean, it's still stealing. It's mine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just think that the majority of the cases involved are just, you know, large record corporations that are worried that, I mean, the initial worry was that sites like Napster were going to take down the record industry, when the fact of the matter is that the internet took down the record industry. iTunes took down the record industry. I mean, they lost much more business from individual song sales than they did from people downloading. I mean, it's their own fault for not capitalizing on the iTunes thing sooner. I mean, for not coming up with that idea before Apple did. So, I mean, the biggest problem for me is that our government has spent a lot of money to police this, when, I mean, it's obvious that we need money in other places. I mean, the budget talks are a definite sign of that. And
well, okay. I mean, but their job is to enforce the law, right?
yes, but
And just because you know, I don't know, maybe you were like a LimeWire fiend, or your friends were in college, because it wasn't too long ago you were in college, and I imagine if I checked your iPod, you know, carefully. I mean, I use Netflix or not Netflix, Napster to go, so I pay like $15 a month or whatever it is, and I can download anything I want. It's all legal. I
buy CDs and actually vinyl albums in local record stores usually. I have a huge vinyl collection.
That's still, yeah, Wax is still going.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a whole thing.
I love it.
Where do you buy them?
Most
At the
of
local
my
record
vinyls-
store, Record Town,
Well,
Tape World.
there is one in Lynchburg, but I get most of them at thrift stores for about $1 a piece.
No.
Yeah. And my parents also gave my collection a huge kickstart. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that it is illegal, but I also think that if our government is looking at, I mean, especially now when we're looking at non-essential services and what we need to cut back on money-wise, I would say that Social Security is probably a little bit more important than going after kids that are downloading music. But that's just my 2 cents.
Because you were a kid who was downloading music.
Well,
If you were a senior citizen.
I think I paid for enough of my music. I'm not gonna.
It's just rich people getting hurt. Screw them.
And the biggest place where kids get music is internetwork connections in colleges anyway, and they have no right to go in and look at that. So,
If you would like to weigh in on the side of the whoa, that's not good. If you'd like to weigh in on the side, we always react to that. This is a loud beep because I clicked the wrong thing, and I don't think the audience can hear it. So I think we just all of a sudden.
we just look crazy.
Yeah, we look like music downloading fools. But if you'd like to weigh in, please give us a call. Our number is 818-688-6625, 818-688-6625. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so you're not thoroughly for the big corporations. What'd you think? Remember when they were suing people, and that woman held out, and I don't know if she down like her kid or I don't know. It was like this huge judgment, and she held out and went to trial, and she was guilty as hell, and they found her guilty, and it was like this, I don't know, $1 million in fines, because it's a serious fine, every copyright infringement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things they don't get everybody, but when they get you, you know.
And
like insider trading, they really nail you because they don't.
Yeah. And you always hear about, it's always kids that they get for some reason.
Well, that's normally, I don't know what's, I keep clicking the wrong thing. Okay.
But I mean, I remember a case of, I think it was a kid at either MIT or BU while I was in graduate school who got fined some ridiculous fee. And of course, you know, he's on like full tuition and still has tons of loans. And I mean, it's hard not to root for that person. It's just like, where's that money going to go? Like it's going to, you know, Warner Brothers or whatever other record company he was downloading from. And
well, really, they were their own victims because they did not. Hindsight's 20/20, right? But
they didn't protect their music enough.
They didn't do that, but they were also anal. Like there was like I have no sympathy because I used to like a DVD. They would argue you couldn't make a backup copy. I think finally that was litigated. They said you could. But their answer was, you buy a DVD. If it breaks, you buy another DVD. And my response is, screw you. I've already paid for the rights to have the movie. I'm replacing a $1 disc. I shouldn't have to pay full price for it. You should either sell me a replacement if I send you the pieces, or I should have the right to back it up and make a copy. And because they were so arrogant and screw the consumer in their attitude, that they did not engender any sympathy. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they're not viewed as a sympathetic figure, but it's just they have lots of money and they donate. Their PAC donates money, and
if you make the consumer unhappy, someone else is going to step in with better technology and replace what you do. Like
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, or Netflix did that for movies. I
love my Netflix, man.
Me too.
I love my Netflix.
Instant access to so many movies, and you don't have to tote around DVDs and worry about people scratching them. I think it made everyone a little anal retentive once DVDs came into being, because they skip so easy. But yeah.
And of course, the most important news of late is that effective July, currently, all of the Star Trek episodes, except Deep Space Nine, are now streamable on Netflix. You don't have to get the discs. All the series.
I haven't even made it through the X-Files yet.
In fact, I returned a disc. I'm watching. I'm on a the Next Generation kick right now, and I actually forgot, because I knew that it was going to happen. I forgot that it happened, so I had a disc. I didn't even watch any of them because I was streaming them, and then so I returned them, and I've got to change my queue so I don't get more of those. I'm gonna get some. I don't know what to get. And then another frustrating thing is when you, when you, what am I saying? There's a technical problem in the screening room. I've got to go over there. And it's a charger, but I hate it when you go to a Redbox and you rent a movie, and then you go home and you realize it was on streaming Netflix, but you didn't know. There needs to be an app. Netflix, they need to have an app on your phone so you can go to Redbox. That would even make the line worse.
And check to see if it's on Netflix.
And see, is this on? A quick. Google could add that.
I do like that you can skip over from Rotten Tomatoes, which is one of the best movie criticism sites on the web. And if you're looking at, what critics have to say about a movie, there's a little button right there that says add to my Netflix queue. It's very convenient. Brings you right over. Tells you if it's instant or not. We're digressing.
We are digressing. Why don't you, there was another big thing here.
Yeah.
Let me put you on that for a minute while I address this little issue.
All right. Well, in case News Corp needed some more bad news today, and I guess this doesn't affect them as much as dropping their paper. But today, a federal appeals court upheld media ownership rules dating back from the 70s, which state that a media company cannot own both broadcast and print news sources in the same local market. So essentially, your local paper could not be owned by, your local TV news. And the people that it really affect are the larger corporations. And their argument is that now with the internet, that the entire landscape of news has changed from when these rules were initially made. The idea when the FCC made the rules in the 70s was that if a company owned both the newspaper and the television news station, that it would give them too much control over the media that people view. And now with the internet, people have so many varied different sources of news that it's supposedly a lot harder to get away with what you would have been able to do if you owned both stations. My argument against this is that local news is still, in the city of Lynchburg, we deal with a situation where I guess we're a 3-newspaper town, and we still miss stories. All of us miss stories, I think. And there's local news that only gets reported by one source and doesn't hit the internet and doesn't go national. So people have no other places to get the news besides, their TV station or the newspaper. So you can argue as much as you want that the internet would solve that problem, but it really doesn't. The other argument is that news corporations just can't keep up financially based on what the internet has done to change the business landscape. And I would argue that News Corp is doing fine. But they're just one example. I guess I'm not sure that the New York Times has expressed interest in buying a local TV station in New York, or any other paper for that matter. But
Emily's never been happier to see me. What's the argument for it? What's the argument for
upholding the rules?
Okay, they upheld the rule.
Yeah.
To prevent, is it all markets or just big markets? Isn't it big markets?
No, it's local markets.
But isn't it like New York's a local market, and Lukenbach, Texas, population 80 is a local market? I mean, is it all local markets?
I think so.
Because the obvious argument for saying you can't, that a TV station, a radio station, newspaper cannot own a television station can't own. But I don't think that's in the case in all markets, because like here in Lynchburg, Channel 10 and the News in Advance and a bunch of other newspapers are owned by Media General. So there are limits. I'm not sure how it works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the argument for the separation is what's happened with all the big corporate ownership of all the. I mean, it's
10's not technically in Lynchburg though. It's in Roanoke.
I guess I don't know if it's. Yeah, I don't know how it works. We need to find out.
Yeah, we don't know the details on
but
that.
Okay, the argument against. I mean, newspapers. A lot of newspapers are going out of business. A lot of newspapers are hurting. I used to work for the Boston.
I freelanced for the Boston Globe.
For the Boston Globe, which was owned by the New York Times.
Yeah.
So you can almost say you're a former New York Times writer.
Yeah, not quite.
Not quite. But
it was the Times that was threatening to sell the Globe if they couldn't fire enough reporters and cut enough costs. So.
But here's the deal. Wouldn't they be better off? Because there are economies of scale. Like the News in Advance here in Lynchburg, you'll see stories on their website with video from Channel 10. And I'm sure that when they break stories, they're you could send one reporter out with a camcorder. I mean, shoot, I had not this BlackBerry, but a different one just like this. I shot an interview, and it was on the CBS Evening News. I gave it to CBS, and I was watching. Katie Couric was off that night. It was right around Thanksgiving and a year ago, and I see this is the CBS, and I'm like watching, like that's my video, and I was like, and I think I was at a restaurant. I was like, look, and I was like, this is the video, and I showed him on my phone, and we're watching it on TV. It was cool, but so you have multitasking reporters. You have one person. Now there's the digital journalist, right? It used to be, I'm not name drop. I was on Good Morning America, and they interviewed me in Front Royal. They had a sound guy with the boom mic, right? And then they had a producer, and they had a camera person, right? I'm saying sound guy. They're all three happen to be men, but I've seen women. But and then the DC stations, when they interview you, they have a camera person and a reporter, right? And the local station will have either that or often it's a reporter with a camera, and you'll see them, especially sports reporters, where they're really. You don't have a big enough staff to send two people to every football game going on that night, right? Especially a TV station. I mean, my gosh, because your coverage area is so big. So you'll see the guy setting the camera up and setting the light up, or turn the light on top of the camera. Then he's standing, I'm, Dan McDermott reporting from so-and-so. And then he rushes back to the station, and they do it. But now you see this term called digital journalists, where you have often someone your age, right, fresh out of journalism school or got a communications degree, and they've got their little, $3,000 or $4,000 Sony camcorder, and they're not a reporter, they're a digital journalist. So they usually won't do a voiceover. They will simply get the video, get the facts, and then the anchor, the six-figure dressed, look great anchor. I have friends who are anchors. I'm just kidding there, but and then they'll say, like, in Sonic, Georgia today, so and so, went to court for whatever charges, and as they're saying this, the video's rolling, and that's their digital correspondent. And often in the union area, that'll be a different classification, so they don't have to make the same pay that a journalist would make, or different tiers. Like in the New York Times, I think entry level, not that a beginning journalist would get a job there, but when the lowest paid reporter, I think, is into the six figures. But anyway, so you have economies of scale, and you have these changing definitions. And really, if you have a good writer, why can't you do all of that and save a newspaper from going out of business? Because it's just cheaper.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I also see the validity in having this rule. I mean, what you're saying essentially would be the equivalent of a broadcast news station employing a print journalist to write their copy for them, essentially. If both the newspaper and the TV station were owned by the same people, they shouldn't be reporting contradictory facts. I mean, I'm sure that would be a big no-no if they were both owned by the same people. And that's the joy of having multiple news sources, is that if one person gets it wrong, the other one gets it right, I guess. So
if Rupert Murdoch owned every print and broadcast facility in many towns, we wouldn't know about this News of the World scandal. And I like Rupert. I was defending Rupert. He's kind of a hero of mine.
Yeah, but
I don't agree with everything he says, but he's a wise man to me.
Without multiple independent sources of news, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're looking at where you'd be no different than, a governmentally controlled paper. That's the only paper. Like North Korea, for example. I mean, if you have one source of news, it's going to be whatever that news says, and there's no one there to go, hey, wait a second. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I got mixed emotions on this, because here's the bad when you have these media conglomerates. When I worked in radio in the 80s, now it was a different time, because you had to read the meter, you had to have someone there with an FCC license, but that was like $7. You'd fill a form out and it was automatic. Only a CB license was easier when they had CB licenses. But you had local news, you had local DJs. Now it's all satellite. Some stations are all satellite, and they'll have local ads, and they'll have some local announcer, maybe. And then in the bigger cities, you'll have live people the whole time. Or you'll have, Rush, who can actually talk for 3 hours straight, and it's interesting. Unlike, that's not a gift I was blessed with. But I just, now, you've got these big companies that own all these stations, and local news is often not present at all. There's no local program. Maybe they'll interview someone and they'll air it at 4 a.m. Sunday morning so they can put on their public file, oh, we aired our public affairs program. But it's just local news has gone away. And
yeah, I think the only place you can find it on the radio now is public radio stations. I know Virginia does great local news on their public radio. Radio IQ does it.
Yeah, Radio IQ is fantastic.
And sometimes
I have a beef with the local. I'm going to rant about the local PBS station. And remember, NPR and PBS are two different things.
Completely separate. But I think the other place that you get it sometimes is when they'll play audio from broadcast news on the radio, which, that would be the only other place. And yeah, there just isn't a lot of news on the radio anymore, which it's a shame, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of a thorn in the side of the local PBS station. I love the NPR station, and I'm not a left winger. I'm just kidding.
NPR is not just for left-wing people.
I know. The Car Talk guys are dangerous left-wing extremists.
Well, yeah, but they're from Cambridge.
That was quick.
Find a
That was
right-wing
good.
extremist. I've actually met the Car Talk brothers, or I've seen them from afar at a parade, I guess.
That's actually an Anthony Weiner thing. He had click and clack, dangerous left-wingers. He was trying to make the point. But yeah, I mean, clearly it's a liberal news organization, and I can see Republicans being upset. And I can see the argument in Virginia. I think they just cut off state funding for the rest of the year. I don't know the details, but Governor McDonald made the point that, you know, there are other options. It's not necessary like it was. But really, first let me rant, okay? I want to rant against the PBS station, which is what, Blue Ridge PBS, WBRA, whatever. I'm a fan of the McLaughlin Group. The round table, they all scream at each other, right? My dad hates it because they're all screaming. You know, you can't pay attention. He likes a nice orderly. He probably loves the news hour, you know.
Yeah.
Just, you know. But anyway, so I love the McLaughlin Group. Big fan, right? And it's taped Friday. So in the city, what I'm used to, you could watch it Friday night after it was taped. And I get tweets from them when they're done taping and they say, you know, Mort Zuckerman and Eleanor, let me finish, Cliff. And anyway, so during their fundraising, right, I'm watching, I tune in, I rush home. It's 11:30. I'm tuned in, ready to watch. And it's not on. I see some Susie Orman or whatever, some BS, right? Mm-hmm. And then I look, and there's all these local people answering the phone. They're having this, we're you know, PBS is so great. And then I call the number, and I got some company in Ohio or something taking the calls. So I try to call, and there's no answer. So I emailed them, and they're like, well, our government or whatever funding doesn't cover blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, like, what do you make? How much do you earn? And how much does the local TV station pay compared to you? And if you go to their studio, I mean, it's, you know. Anyway, I'm guessing they're probably set, right? I think they're state employees, or it's Virginia Tech that owns it. Anyway, I could be wrong. Maybe I'll get an email saying, you know, I'm an idiot.
I mean, I can only speak for public radio stations, but they tend to be, you know, vastly understaffed, or like mostly unpaid interns and a few reporters, and they don't make a lot of money.
NPR or PBS?
NPR.
Okay, I'm talking PBS. I love Radio IQ. It's fantastic, the NPR radio station. But the separate organization, it's still public broadcasting, but it's the TV version is what I'm ranting about. I love the radio version here.
I just always thought that NPR and PBS would get equivalent funding, but that might not be true.
I think the costs are different.
Oh, of course.
But anyway, okay, so I tell her, and I'm like, okay, what's the deal? You know, I tuned in for the one show that I always religiously watch, the McLaughlin Group. I want to, you know, hear them all scream at each other, and Eleanor and Pat go at it, and it's not on. And she's like, oh, well, we have to suspend our programming for fundraising. And they do this several times a year for weeks. And so it's off for weeks. And then she's like, oh, well, it's on Wednesday at 7 a.m. And I'm like, okay, so it's a time perishable program. It's current issues, right? You're going to air it 5 days late at 7 a.m. But they have a lock on it because it's in D.C. and probably in Chicago. They produce it at Channel 9, WUSA. It used to be at Channel 4, but now it's at Channel 9. And so it airs on that station locally. And I think in the D.C. market, it regularly beats Meet the Press, which is for a long time been number one. Maybe Brinkley beat them, but, you know. Anyway, so it just made me mad. I'm like, this, you know, so every time they do it, I just shoot the lady back an email. I just want to renew my objection to your replacing time perishable content, the McLaughlin Group, which is an excellent show that regularly beats Meet the Press in the DC market, where it's actually played at a good time, and to run one of the 3 infomercials that you're running in a constant loop for weeks. I mean, I'm being flippant, but I'm not. There's about 3 shows. They run them over and over. You know, some little girl fiddling. Okay, great. She's awesome. Or she can break glass with her voice. great, awesome. But I want my McLaughlin Group.
Obviously, you're not in the target demographic for the Blue Ridge PBS.
Correct, because I don't give them money. I would donate to NPR. I would donate to the local NPR station. In fact, we occasionally give them free.
We, the Lynchburg Times.
The Lynchburg Times, we occasionally feed them audio that they'll use.
Mm-hmm.
We had an interview, I think, with Jerry Falwell Jr. and local state senator Steve Newman about an interchange. It wasn't about religion or politics. It was about they were going to build this interchange, and there was this the landlocked area that was industrial zone, but you couldn't easily get it to the highway to get your products out or your raw materials in, and they were going to build an entrance, an interchange on the highway, and so it was, could create a bunch of jobs and like hundreds of acres, So they were into that, and they ran it, and so we've helped them, but yeah, they won't be getting my video at WBRA until they start running the McLaughlin Group. If they have a lock on the program, they shouldn't just suspend it for weeks at a time, because you have to wait till Monday or Tuesday before it shows up on YouTube.
Yeah, it's a shame when local affiliates fail to pick up on the great programming that the bigger groups do. One of my favorite things that PBS does is Frontline, and Frontline is an incredible series.
That guy's voice.
Oh, it's awesome.
On Frontline. He got in trouble. What did he do? Didn't he do some sarcastic?
Oh, I hadn't heard about that.
I thought he got in trouble.
I actually applied to work with them though when I was.
No, it was the
living in
Geico
Boston.
voice. Wasn't it the Geico voice?
No
I
idea.
forget. There was some scandal or something.
But Frontline's a great program.
Wacky announcers.
But you can get it on video and on Netflix. So, I never watch it on TV anymore. But
you should be supporting your.
I think it's a shame when cutting funding to things like that just group a lot of different things into one big, it's generalization, and I really don't think that you can argue that it's all bad. I don't
think it's all bad, and that's not the argument. It's about dollars. Obviously, it's like when I was talking about the unions last night, Scott Walker, and they're like, oh, blah, blah. It's straight up, it was union busting, okay? It was union busting. And I agreed with it in that case. Public sector unions, and I said this last night, and this guy, I was hoping he'd call. I'm disappointed he didn't call, because he was beating me up pretty good today on my Google Plus page. And I wanted to call. I wanted to talk to him about it. But my argument was that you shouldn't have public sector unions, mandatory union membership, dues coming out to support the Democrats who perpetuate the system. And they voted the Republicans in, and they got rid of it. And they were, pulling of hair, gnashing of teeth in the state capitol and all that. But I don't know. It's like the whole PBS argument. There's a legitimate view that the government shouldn't be supporting that, and Juan Williams firing is the thing that did it. But really,
but that was NPR.
That was NPR, but that turned that brought up the whole thing. Why are we paying for this still? But and then they argue how much Sesame Street brings in, and Big Bird is not on welfare, big money. But the argument for NPR, I was driving my car, and I was just listening, and I forget, it was one of the loons on the talk show station I normally listen to. I listen to Rush, and I listen to sometimes I listen to Hannity. Sometimes in the morning line's great, but there's a couple in there that I'm just not. I'm not going to say who, but they have like too many storable foods and stuff ads, and it's just scary.
Does it start with a B and end in a K?
I'm not going to say. But anyway, I don't want any of these guys mad at me.
You don't want to buy gold now, Dan.
No, get storable foods for when Janet Reno comes to get your guns. But anyway, no, so I'm listening, and there was this story about this woman, and she spoke poorly. She had something. It turns out she had, what did Janet Reno have? Parkinson's disease. And that's why she spoke in some sort of difficult way. So anyway, I'm listening to her story, and this woman came from a good Christian background growing up. Had never drunk alcohol. One man she married. Walked the walk, talked the talk, lived the life. And then one day she put a quarter in a slot machine, and it gave her such a thrill, and she emptied her quarters, right? Then she went back the next day, and then she would discovered you could play online, and it didn't matter that you couldn't win any money. It was the rush. And so then she would go to the casino all day, and then at night she would play online all night, not sleep, come back, and she ended up selling everything, and she was weeping in tears in this interview. She sold everything, and then what did she do? Her husband left her. She's crying because she called her children and said, "I've sold everything that you should have inherited to play these slot machines." And it turns out she was on this drug for Parkinson's. And there were stories like this across the country of all of a sudden, because it was something about dopamine, that rush you get when you find something unexpected, and you get this rush. And it turns out that that was an effect of this drug. It had such an incredible high from the dopamine or whatever, that there were cases. This was not isolated. There were these stories around the country, and they found out that it was this drug, and they stopped her, and she said, bam, within a couple days, no desire to gamble at all. But her husband was gone. All her stuff was, and I would have never heard that story, but I just wasn't into whoever, and flipped it over to NPR and heard that and learned something while I was driving the car, instead of listening to the same 15 songs over and over again. I don't know. I just and the wonderful story about the HeLa cells. That's something you'll hear every once in a while. They do. The woman who wrote that great book about the woman had cervical cancer, and they cut her cell. And there was some guy at Johns Hopkins who was studying. They were trying to find a cell that because before then, to test anything, you had to test on a human. You couldn't grow human cells outside the human body. And so this woman had this cell, and the assistant in the lab fed it before she went home, like all the petri dishes. And the next day it wasn't dead. It's like, what in the world is going on? And the next day it wasn't. It kept growing and growing. And that strain still exists today. It was Henrietta Lacks, I think, or Lax, or I'm sorry, but that's what it's called, HeLa, and it was an immortal cell strain, and it's still alive. It won't die. It was a tumor, and it's been. I mean, that's how they got polio, because they were able to test things on these HeLa cells. That's how they cured polio, and it's just fascinating. This woman, and they never told the children. They never asked her if they could do this with her cell. She died of the cancer, and then her children found out like recently that it was their mother, and the kids are in their 60s, and they're not science-oriented folks, just regular working folks, and they were shocked. And it was like, well, it's not like it's like part of her. It's not like her fingernail in a museum. It's like a part of her still alive, and without their permission was spread around the world. And they said, I think if you put them all together, it would like go to the moon and back. And so that's a story I wouldn't have learned but for NPR. Yeah. And you know what? There is no commercial value in telling either of those stories. There's no money to be made except someone writing a book. But it's some of the gotcha stuff they do on Frontline. Although it tends to be just straight up liberal left-wing stuff, but the right wing gets lots of stuff because that's where the money is.
You think Frontline's left-wing?
I think a lot of their stuff tends to be liberal.
Huh. See, I would argue that Frontline is some of the most unbiased, hard-hitting reporting that is on television. But
we'll find out next week on Frontline.
I mean, we use Frontline in a lot of my courses in J-School.
Oh, I'm sure in journalism school.
Why did... let's not go there.
You people. Anyway, that was my waxing eloquent about... I like NPR, but I'm very mad at Blue Ridge PBS because they won't show the McLaughlin Group every week. They should pick a time. They're like, well, you can just check our website. I'm like, I don't want to check your stupid website. Every other show I watch, O'Reilly isn't on at 9:30 one night. Maybe on the inauguration.
You know what your rant reminds me of is that the person who cancels their subscription to the daily newspaper because they got rid of their favorite comic strip in the back.
Well, if that's the only reason they got it.
It's true.
I don't care why you pick up one of my papers. A lot of people just do the Sudoku and throw it away, you know. I just hope they look for the ads on their way to the Sudoku puzzle.
Yeah, glance through our ads.
I don't know.
Call some of the phone numbers.
So you support the separation of ownership between, to not allow, in certain cases, to not allow someone to own a newspaper and broadcast outlets in the same town.
Yeah, I think that.
Even if it would save a newspaper. Arguably, you can argue either way.
I mean, I'm not sure that it would save the newspaper to do that. is the argument that even if it physically saved the newspaper, it wouldn't save what the newspaper was doing. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the way it saves the newspaper is obviously economies of scale, and also your sales folks. You can go to your print advertisers and say, well, for an extra 50%, we can give you this package on the TV network too.
Well, yeah, and
vice versa.
Physically saving the newspaper, but the content in the newspaper could be affected. I mean, yeah, this is definitely it's a tricky decision, and I think that it's right that it's going through higher courts to figure it out.
One person who owns a newspaper is hungrier than about that paper than someone who owns a big CEO of a corporation who has tons and tons of different properties. I don't know. I mean,
it's tricky.
It's hard to justify in this day and age, with so many different outlets for news, and even just anybody can just do it, you know, on the internet and everything. But it's still, newspapers are important. Almost everything that we've talked about on this show from the first episode originated in a newspaper somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that on TV. There are some exceptions like 60 Minutes, which is fantastic, but a lot of that stuff originated somewhere else. They heard about it. And almost everything you hear on the radio, which is either from the local paper or from AP, which is of course owned by the newspapers. Much of what you hear on the TV, although in a big city TV, you know, they'll go out. But every important story. I mean, can you imagine some network affiliate doing the Pentagon Papers? Can you imagine? There was this big story about all the government contractors in the Washington Post, and they said there's hundreds of thousands of government contractors in the D.C. all across the country that nobody knows about.
It was an excellent piece. It
was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. She was on the story for 2 years, for one story. Granted, it was like 2 or 3 parts, so it was over 2 or 3 days. But she and her crew, for 2 years, and I assume a Pulitzer Prize-winning person at the Post is not working, you know, for Bob Woodward's $1 a year because he makes so much money in books. What TV station or can you imagine a local radio station hiring someone with a Pulitzer Prize, paying them 6 figures plus a staff to work for 2 years to be able to have a story for 3 days? I mean, newspapers have a role to play, and as do so many things. And you can say, oh, well, Facebook and Twitter brought down the Egyptian government, but newspapers are important, and you want independent voices. And so I don't know how I feel about it. Owning a newspaper, I'd like to have the right to buy a TV station if I wanted. Not that I could afford it.
But we have the internet, Dan.
But if people would stop pirating my games, maybe I could afford to buy all these TV stations bit of a stretch.
It is a bit of a stretch.
I did get 40% of the wholesale price for the game whenever they sold it for several years. I don't think it's not for sale. It hasn't been for some time. Anyway, all right. Are we done?
I think
Have
so.
we exhausted our topics for the night?
I think we have. And no one called.
I know. Nobody calls. It's wallpaper. But you know what? I have... we've had a number of callers, but I think all prearranged, right? I'm trying to get this union guy to get on there. And I'm polite. I'm a nice guy. I'll listen to him.
Dan's really excited to debate you if you're listening.
Yeah, I want the union guy to call and yell at me, and let's have it out, you know? And his whole, I'll just say, I'm going to say, I don't know if he, I really want to like say what he said, but in general, I'm not going to say who he is, but some guy, he's an honest guy. And I said last night, I was ranting about the Wisconsin thing. I said it's money laundering when you have folks who are required to be in a union or they can't teach, and then their dues come out of their pay, mandatory, and then the union donates the money to the politicians who perpetuate the system, and it's this incestuous money laundering going on. And he said, well, I don't want to paraphrase because I'll do a poor job, but he basically said, well, look, his final argument was, he said, well, unions do all these good things and you know, people get screwed, and that's true. It was truer in the past, but there's still, I'm not anti-union in every case. I'm anti-public employee unions, but like the coal miners, if anybody needs a union, it's those guys, because they're like dying, right? But it's just
or not dying in Chile. That was such a great news story.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. What a soap opera. I'm sure the News of the World had in-depth coverage. Probably, yeah. But anyway, so to summarize, he said, you know, he made a point. He said, look, it's majority rule, and the whole union shop thing. Because in Virginia, this would be anathema. We're a right-to-work state, and I say that the vernacular, that right to work, meaning you don't have to join a union to keep the job. But if you are a teacher in Wisconsin under these rules, a public school teacher, you can either join the union and be a public school teacher, or you can move to another state to teach, or you can work at a private school. You cannot, you know, that's not American to me. And he made the point. He said, well, it's majority rule, and the majority voted for this. And if the majority of the people vote for Obama or McCain, he's the president for everybody. And so I see his point. I still disagree with it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is a states' rights issue that if their state, but obviously they're having problems with whether their state thinks it's appropriate. So.
And last thing, the Mexican citizen, Supreme Court, it was a 5-4 decision. That's interesting. A 5-4 decision to not do anything, to turn down the request from the Obama administration to issue a stay in the case of a Mexican citizen who had lived here, I think, most of his life. But the issue was that when he was charged with a capital crime in Texas, that he was not, the embassy, he wasn't advised, or the embassy wasn't notified to offer assistance to consular embassy, and they said that was a violation of a treaty. And the other side said, well, Congress had a year to act on it, and they didn't, so he was executed tonight. So anyway, all right, we'll maybe have aftermath on that tomorrow. Hey, thanks for everyone who's watching this on YouTube later or live. I'm Dan McDermott, and this is the McDermott Report, and this is a lovely, talented Emily Williams. Yay. Senior political writer.
That's right.
For the Lynchburg Times, lynchburgtimes.com, and we just put up a interview she did with a congressional candidate today. It's finally up.
Excellent.
Anyway, so we're here. I'm here, and Emily's usually here, but we're here every night, weeknight, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. The live players are at live.mcdermottreport.com. I'm trying to make that site better, but that works. We're on Blog Talk Radio, Ustream, etc., and then it goes to YouTube. We love your calls. You can always give us a call. The number stays the same, 818-688-6625. And I'm on Google+. I'd love to have you chat with me there. Also, I love Google+. But anyway, thank you so much. Emily, thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
And let's call it a night.